What we have here is something I've referenced throughout the book is my high velocity peaking method for my particular athletes that we've found extremely effective in teaching the muscles in the body to function exactly how it is in sports. And again, this was brought to me by Dr. Michael Yessis. If you're straining at 100% maximal effort in the squat, it is not the movement that exists in sports. Okay, only in powerlifting does that usually take place. So you're not teaching your athletes to be that explosive, and you're not teaching their bodies to function correctly. Um, a lot of our peaking methods, again, as I mentioned in other videos, came from weightlifting, powerlifting, okay, for the weight room. And what happens is people take their models and apply them. You'll get results if the athlete needs to get stronger, but you will not get optimal results because you're not teaching the body to fire as fast as it normally would in proper function. And then also, I guess the AFSM method that I came up with ultimately is what you want to implement here. Basically, essentially teaching your muscles to turn on and off, forcing relaxation so that it becomes a learned motor skill. Now I know there's two camps in this story. In one camp, if you go over to my motor development people and some, of the top-notch doctors over there that are in neurosciences would say, yes, it's a motor skill. You have to teach this, and because there's a signal that's taking place, or the removal of a signal when you sometimes relax these muscles. But ultimately, that's one camp. Another camp, you go to the physiologist and they'll say all that matters is the sarcoplasmic reticulum sucking back up the calcium out of the muscle and the cross bridges, and that's the only thing that matters, and that is obviously built upon by oxidative work. But however, realistically, it's maybe something we won't know for another 10 to 20 years based upon technology, but you really have to assume that it's honestly a combination of both. So then that again is my AFSM method that I speak of, that we wrote an article about in my book. The 5-day peaking program. Now look, this is your choice, or I'm sorry, the 2-day peaking program, this is your choice. You can also make it 3, and what are the guidelines for that? Well, I've had people call me and say, hey, my guys are eating this up, they're getting results. Do you think I can go for a 3rd day? I say, well, as long as your athletes have had a good fitness base, a good preparation up to this point, you might be able to do a 3-day. And that is also dependent on how much volume takes place during the course of their how should I say this, course of their week in regards to your coach's practice plans. Because if the coaches practice at a very high level with a lot of volume, then you may only want to do 2. But again, the guidelines for this is just the quality and speed of the movement. If you watch athletes do this, be aware that they may not be motivated because they got beat up, but they also may be doing so much volume that the bar is starting to move slower. One method I'm working on with an elite Olympic swimmer, one of the top in the world, he is doing the peaking method 3 days a week, and we're actually readdressing the triphasic. So the latter 2 days of the week, he's doing a peaking method, high velocity, and then we actually slid in a triphasic. So he will do 1 or 2 weeks on Monday of eccentric, and then 1 or 2 weeks of isometric, and then 1 or 2 weeks of the concentric loading. And the other 2 days of the week, he will do the high peaking, high velocity method with a lot of the oscillatory movements, and the AFSM method in the book that I speak of. He will use that method to finish the week out. But we want to address him on an eccentric component. Now, there's many ways to implement various components of any of this lifting. However it works for you or your athlete is great, but realize this: what works for half the kids may not work for the other half the kids. And I'm starting to get to be able to identify that before I try it. This becomes a very complex process, and hopefully in the future I feel some comfortable on, let's say, maybe writing about that. But this, again, there's so many variables within the human organism. It's basically the dynamic system theories that you can't really identify one quality that works, or that is a signal to push your athletes into the right program. So what you have to do is essentially experiment, see what happens, and then ultimately change the kids into a different programs. Now, hopefully your programs evolve so that when you write these programs, that you can steer in a different direction as you need to in regards to what fits best athletes. For example, I believe in 25 of my athletes, I have 9 different programs going at once. I should say a combination of 9 programs. So realistically, it's a combination of 5 different types of programs, and then with all the different types of athletes we had on this 25-man roster, we had 9 different programs mixed and matched in there to best fit the athlete's needs. But again, this peaking method, all I can say to give you some guidelines on is you may want to use the various concepts of training the right energy system for the duration. You'll notice that this type of training is done with a lot of time sets, so that you actually, when you get to your peaking, which is very important, tying the weight room and the field together. And the one way to do that is through setting your sets. Instead of doing reps, you do your reps for time, and all your entire program is organized out so that all the sets are done for the same amount of time. And we've addressed this in the book, but with that, keep in mind you're applying the same stress to the organism, and you will ultimately, the organism will adapt to the same stress, which it can adapt at higher levels. For example, if you're training for a powerlifting meet and a triathlon, we know that doesn't work. It's too much stress. Well, so then on the other end of the spectrum, you want to apply all the same stress to the organism. So then, therefore, if you're going to do 7-second sets for 7 seconds, what needs to transpire is that they all go for 7 seconds, and what happens is you ultimately adapt to that 7 seconds. And you can say it adapts to the energy system or whatever it may be. But just be aware that that's the future of programming. And with the future of programming, how much is too much? I guess you have to be a coach and lay out some things that you can do to set guidelines on how much an athlete needs to do. I believe I wrote an article on biometrics, parametrics, which is basically taking another motor skill and identifying your best effort, and then doing some sets, and then rechecking that motor skill. Hopefully I said that right, the biometric, parametric section in this book. But ultimately, with technology coming out, we'll be able to identify an exact time and an exact place in a workout where an athlete needs to shut it down because you're not getting the desired training result. Now, sometimes you want to train and push an athlete beyond what they currently say is good, but other times there's where you don't want to do that. And this peaking method is an example of what you want to do. And again, this program that I provide worked for the group of athletes that I provided it for because I understood their base. They've been training with me for a number of weeks. This group at this particular point had about 30 weeks of training with me straight. So I had a lot of control into what was going on. Actually, I should say 40 weeks of training during the course of the year. I'll take them through the rest of the year and restart, but ultimately that's where they've been with me. So anyway,